This is VOA News. I'm Marissa Melton. Yemen ministers visited the site of a deadly stampede in the capital Sana'a on Thursday and announced that an investigation was underway to find the cause of the incident that killed at least 78 people. Two witnesses told Reuters that the situation unfolded when hundreds of people crowded to receive charitable gifts of about $9 per person. Authorities say the two merchants responsible for organizing the donation event have been detained. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres called for an immediate halt to fighting in Sudan on Thursday and appealed for a three-day ceasefire to mark the end of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan to enable trapped civilians to seek safety and supplies.
I am deeply concerned about the terrible toll on civilians, the appalling humanitarian situation, and the horrifying prospects of further escalation.
Guterres has been negotiating to achieve a de-escalation since violence erupted last Saturday between former allies, now rivals, who led the Sudanese army and the local paramilitary rapid support forces. Mali's government says a senior Malian official and 3 other people have been killed in an ambush in an area of the country's southwest. Islamic extremists are active in that region. The president's chief of staff was killed along with his bodyguard, a driver, and the owner of a drilling company, according to a statement from the presidency. Another driver is still missing. The government didn't say when they died or who it believed to be behind the attack. Hong Kong's Roman Catholic bishop says he hopes the Diocese of Hong Kong and Beijing will have more exchanges and cooperation. That's according to a Hong Kong public broadcaster's report Thursday about Bishop Stephen Chow's remarks during Mass in Beijing. He's on a 5-day trip, the first by a Hong Kong bishop in nearly 3 decades. VOA News. Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni will send a bill containing some of the world's harshest anti-LGBTQ legislation back to Parliament for strengthening, according to the ruling party's chief whip on Thursday. Reuters' Emma Jaley has more.
A group of lawmakers from the ruling National Resistance Movement discussed the bill with the president and agreed in principle to sign the bill into law, said Chief Whip Dennis Hampson Obua. He said the bill was being sent back to, quote, facilitate the reinforcement and the strengthening of some provisions.
The bill remains the Anti-Homosexuality Bill 2023.
Human rights activists and the U.S. government say the bill, which was passed last month with near unanimous support, is among the harshest pieces of legislation penalizing sexual minorities anywhere in the world. The United Nations, European Union, and a long list of corporate giants have condemned it.
Reuters' Emma Jaley reporting. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said Thursday that China should participate in meaningful debt relief for countries facing problems. She said as the world's largest official bilateral creditor, China has served for too long as a roadblock to necessary action.
We believe that the world is big enough for both of us. China and the United States can and need to find a way to live together and share in global prosperity.
Speaking at Johns Hopkins University, Yellen said the United States expects China to make good its pledge to work constructively on issues such as debt relief and climate change. Researchers say the racial gap in stroke deaths in the United States widened during the pandemic. AP correspondent Mike Hempen.
The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says stroke death rates increased for both black and white adults in 2020 and 2021. But the difference in death rates between the two groups increased by 22% compared to 5 years before the pandemic. For decades, black Americans have had a higher stroke death rate than white Americans. Doctors think the virus could have been one of the factors that widened the gap. They say a COVID-19 infection can raise the risk of a stroke. Doctors also believe some people may have been reluctant to see their doctors during the pandemic out of fear of catching the new virus. I'm Mike Hempen.
New Mexico prosecutors have decided to drop criminal charges against actor Alec Baldwin in the fatal shooting of cinematographer Helena Hutchins on the set of the Western movie Rust in 2021. This information comes from Baldwin's lawyers on Thursday. It arrived the same day that Baldwin and other cast members resumed filming on the movie in the state of Montana. From Washington, I'm Marissa Melton, VOA News. This is VOA News. I'm Marissa Melton. The Supreme Court has preserved women's access to a drug used in the most common method of abortion, rejecting lower court restrictions while a lawsuit continues. The justices on Friday granted emergency requests from the Biden administration and New York-based Danco Laboratories, maker of the drug mifepristone. They're appealing a lower court ruling that would roll back Food and Drug Administration approval of mifepristone. The drug has been approved for use in the United States since 2000, and more than 5 million people have used it. Mifepristone is used in combination with a second drug in more than half of all abortions in the United States. Ukrainian Minister of Defense Oleksiy Reznikov said Friday he felt supported by his allies as they said they would stand with his country until the end of the war. His remarks came after a meeting of NATO member states and their allies at Ramstein Air Base in Germany on Friday.
I'm satisfied because I heard very important words from my colleagues that they will stand with us, with the Ukraine, till the end of this war. And the meaning of the end of this war for them is victory of Ukraine.
The meeting is the latest in a series of arms-pledging conferences to Ukraine since Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered the invasion of Ukraine last year. NATO member states and their allies have provided Ukraine with weapons and armor, but Ukraine's leadership has repeatedly asked for more powerful weapons and quicker supplies. Russia's military has acknowledged that a bomb accidentally dropped by one of its own warplanes caused a powerful blast in the Russian city of Belgorod, about 40 kilometers east of the Russia-Ukraine border. About an hour after the explosion on Friday, the Russian Defense Ministry acknowledged that a weapon accidentally released by one of its own bombers caused the blast. Military experts say it was likely a 500-kilogram bomb. VOA News. A 3-day ceasefire in Sudan for the Eid al-Fitr holiday has failed to transpire. As the World Health Organization reported, nearly a week of violence has killed more than 400 people. Reuters correspondent David Doyle has more.
The first day of Eid al-Fitr was marked by gunfire ripping through neighborhoods of Sudan's capital, Khartoum, on Friday. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres had attempted to broker a temporary truce over the 3-day Muslim holiday, but unabated fighting has undermined those efforts and left hundreds dead. Footage released by the military showed army troops brandishing semi-automatic weapons in the north of the capital. Witnesses said soldiers and gunmen from the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces shot at each other in the north, west and centre of the city, including during the call to prayer.
That's Reuters' David Doyle reporting. Chile is going to nationalize its lithium industry, the world's second largest producer of the metal essential in electric vehicle batteries. Reuters correspondent Diane Toh reports.
President Gabriel Boric announced a shock move in a televised address on Thursday, saying it's the country's best chance at, quote, transitioning to a sustainable and developed economy.
Chile has one of the largest lithium reserves of the world. It is a mineral that, being in electric bus and car batteries, is key in the fight against the climate crisis, against climate change. This is an opportunity for economic growth that will be difficult to beat in the short term.
Mexico nationalized its lithium deposits last year, while Indonesia banned exports of nickel ore, a key battery material, in 2020.
Reuters' Diane Toh reporting. Argentine President Alberto Fernandez will not run in the country's October general election. This, according to the center-left leader himself. He announced it on Friday, throwing open a race to lead the Peronist coalition at the ballot amid a swirling economic crisis. In a video message, Fernandez, who came into office in late 2019, said he would not seek a second term in office. The move comes amid a deep economic crisis, with soaring prices pushing up poverty to near 40%, hammering voters' earning and spending power. And British Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab has resigned from office following an investigation into allegations that he bullied his colleagues. Several formal complaints were lodged against him. Raab posted a resignation letter on Twitter Friday. He said he called for the investigation and vowed to resign if it made any finding of bullying. He said, "I believe it's important to keep my word." He also said, however, that he believes the investigation has set a dangerous precedent. From Washington, I'm Marissa Melton, VOA News. This is VOA News. I'm Marissa Melton. The head of Sudan's Rapid Support Forces, that's the paramilitary forces, Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, on Saturday told Al Arabiya TV that he will not negotiate with Army Chief General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan after a week of strife that has killed hundreds of people. He says RSF supports the UN decisions and the international community in relation to the war law and preservation of civilians and foreigners' lives. And we welcome any international initiatives to keep the civilians off the pain of war. The World Health Organization reported Friday that 413 people had been killed and 3,551 injured since fighting broke out last week. The World Food Programme is bracing for further waves of Sudanese refugees reaching neighboring Chad, fleeing the conflict between Sudan's army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. This according to WFP's country director for Chad, Pierre Honorat. He said around 10,000 to 20,000 Sudanese have already crossed the border into Chad a week after the fighting began in Khartoum and other areas of the country.
C'était très impressionnant. On a été tous très très surpris de voir autant d'enfants.
He said it's very harrowing. We were all surprised to see so many children crossing, being there with these women under the trees. There really is nothing else. It's really harrowing, really heartbreaking to see that. We also feel that they've suffered a lot, physical violence, perhaps for some, but we feel they've had very violent experiences. They've had their houses burned down, their villages destroyed, and some, their neighborhoods completely looted. Honorat added that the new arrivals add to already 400,000 Sudanese refugees who had fled the country during previous conflicts and are already spread out around the Chad border area. VOA News. An Iranian city prosecutor has announced an agreement between the city's judiciary, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and the so-called morality police to form a special force to deal with women who refuse to comply with compulsory veils. Mohammed Mousavian, the city prosecutor of Isfahan, announced the agreement in a ceremony on Saturday. He said severe action will be taken against trade unions if they don't compel their employees to wear a hijab. They could be punished also for serving female customers who don't wear a hijab. Many women in Iran have publicly opposed the mandatory hijab since the death last September of Mahsa Amini, a 22-year-old Kurdish woman who died while in the custody of the morality police. Amini had been detained for allegedly violating the hijab rule. China has warned that a deepening security alliance between the United States and the Philippines should not harm its security and territorial interests. The foreign ministers from China and the Philippines held talks in Manila on Saturday. VOA's Laurel Bowman has more.
China's foreign minister said Saturday his country is willing to work with the Philippines to resolve their differences as tensions rise over Beijing's behavior in the disputed South China Sea and Manila deepens military cooperation with the United States. The foreign ministers of China and the Philippines held talks in Manila just days before Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. travels to Washington for a meeting with U.S. President Joe Biden. Beijing has criticized a recent agreement by the Philippines and the U.S. to grant U.S. forces access to additional local military camps. Laurel Bowman, VOA News, Washington.
Gas prices continued to rise around the United States this past week. AP correspondent Julie Walker has more.
The national average for a regular gas was $3.68 on Friday, up 2 cents from last week, according to AAA. But drivers were paying $4.12 a gallon on average a year ago at this time. In New Jersey, the average price for a gallon of regular jumped 8 cents in a week to $3.52. Again, drivers were paying $4.08 a gallon on average a year ago at this time. Oil prices fell this week amid ongoing market concerns that future interest rate increases could tip the economy into a recession, a move analysts say will likely lead to reduced oil demand and prices in the near future. I'm Julie Walker.
Police are enforcing a curfew in a community on the southern fringes of Jamaica's capital after gunmen fired on people boarding a public minibus, wounding 7 people, including 3 children. The Jamaican Constabulary Force gave no information Saturday on the conditions of the wounded. Marissa Melton, VOA News.
This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey. Foreign governments evacuated diplomats, staff, and others trapped in Sudan as rival generals battled for a ninth day with no sign of a truce that had been declared for a major Muslim holiday. Sudanese are desperately seeking to flee the chaos, and many are risking dangerous roads for the northern border into Egypt. Fierce fighting raged in Omdurman across the Nile from Khartoum. More than 420 people, including 264 civilians, have been killed and more than 3,700 wounded in the fighting between the Sudanese armed forces and the paramilitary group known as the Rapid Support Forces. U.S. Embassy personnel have been evacuated from war-ravaged Sudan. AP correspondent Jackie Quinn reports.
As the warring military factions in Sudan continue fighting for control of the country, U.S. Special Operations Forces swooped down into the capital, Khartoum, loading up some 70 embassy personnel into helicopters and flying them out. There were no shots fired, and the military was on the ground for less than an hour. Once the American diplomatic staffers were safely out of Khartoum, President Biden called for an end to this unconscionable violence. I'm Jackie Quinn.
Thousands of migrants detained for months in southern Mexico formed a new caravan in protest on Sunday to head for the capital to speed up their applications for U.S. asylum. The migrants, mostly Venezuelans, started their march north early in the city bordering Guatemala, where detention centers have been overwhelmed by their vast numbers. Some said they expected to reach Mexico City in about 10 days. This is VOA News. Kenyan police said Sunday they had uncovered bodies of another 26 people believed to be members of a cult, bringing to 47 the number of corpses linked to the movement found in 3 days. On Saturday, police sources said 21 bodies had been exhumed in Kenya in a probe into a cult whose followers are believed to have starved themselves to death. Officials had earlier reported 7 deaths in connection with the investigation in eastern Kenya following the arrest of a man who reportedly told followers to starve themselves in order to, quote, meet Jesus. One of the most important munitions of the Ukraine war comes from a historic factory in the town of Scranton in the northeastern U.S. state of Pennsylvania. VOA's Tommy McNeil has more.
Steel rods are brought in by a train to the Scranton Army ammunition plant to be forged into the artillery shells Kyiv can't get enough of. The plant is at the vanguard of a multi-billion-dollar Pentagon plan to modernize and accelerate its production of ammunition and equipment. It is one of just 2 sites in the U.S. that make the steel bodies for the 155-millimeter howitzer rounds that the U.S. is rushing to Ukraine. The lack of 155-millimeter shells has alarmed U.S. military planners who see it as a critical shortage. Tommy McNeil, VOA News, Washington.
A Washington-based think tank says Ukrainian forces have successfully crossed the wider Dnieper River in the country's south to establish and maintain positions on its east bank. That prompted Ukrainian media on Sunday to hail the reported advances as an early sign of Kyiv's long-awaited spring counter-offensive. The river has for months marked the contact line in Ukraine's southern Kherson region. U.S. Navy veteran Ken Potts, one of the last 2 remaining survivors of the USS Arizona, which sank during the attack on Pearl Harbor, has died at age 102. AP correspondent Julie Walker reports.
Potts died Friday at his Utah home that he shared with his wife of 66 years, according to family friend Randy Stratton, who says, quote, Potts had all his marbles, but was having a hard time getting out of bed lately and was just happy to have made it to 102. Several dozen Arizona survivors have had their ashes interred on the sunken battleship so they could join their shipmates, but Potts didn't want that, according to Stratton. He said he got off once, he's not going back. The only remaining survivor from the Arizona is now Luke Hunter at 101. I'm Julie Walker.
Find more on our website, voanews.com. I'm Joe Ramsey.